In today's World Insight, space missions to the moon with an eye on manned flights to Mars. How close are we to commercial space flights to deep space? What do the breakthroughs in space technology mean for humanity? And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. U.S. private space company SpaceX is developing the spacecraft Starship. Meanwhile, its latest experiments have become global headlines. The company has taken its most daring leap with a round-the-world test flight of its mammoth Starship. It's the biggest rocket ever built with the tall mission of ferrying people to the moon and Mars. The Starship maiden flight was postponed on Monday over safety. Other new missions lined up include NASA teaming up with Jeff Bezos Blue Origin to fly the New Glenn rocket to Mars in 2024 as launches venture deeper into outer space. So how realistic is the goal of sending humans to Mars? What are some of the major achievements and efforts being made by countries around the world toward that goal so far? For deeper insights, let's loop in our panelists, both from US and from China. For more on that, joining us in Washington, D.C., Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, Chair of the Science Operations Working Group for the NASA Mars Exploration Rover mission. And in our Beijing studio, Yang Yuguang, Vice Chair of the International Astronautical Federation Space Transportation Committee. He's also a professor at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Long time no see to both of you. So wonderful to be united again.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be united again.
Good to see you all again.
Thank you so much. Now, the SpaceX is on another mission for exploration. This is one of those efforts by human being to explore Mars. Tell me more, Dr. Ghosh, about your thoughts on the nature of this mission.
Well, the nature is beyond the specific mission. Imagine that the cost of traveling from China to America was $10,000. And suddenly the amount became $100. So what this specific mission, Starship, is trying to do is reduce the cost of spaceflight by about 100 times. So it's a very significant milestone if this technology could be demonstrated. It will change the game. For a budget that would take you to Mars with that same amount of money, you can launch a mission to Neptune. You could fly from one part of the Earth to another part, maybe cheaper than commercial aviation.
On the other hand, though, we have seen several attempts of experiments have failed so far. We hope it could be successful, but so far failed. With the latest failure, Dr. Ghosh, what do you see are the major reasons? And is it easy to overcome these challenges?
Well, there is always a developmental learning curve, and this thing is hard. And I think it can be overcome, but just not in the time frame probably SpaceX or Elon Musk is saying. It will take longer than what they are saying. But eventually, I think, just like, if you think of Falcon 9, it took longer than he said. And he always says that, well, 2 years later, we're going to go to Mars. And we have always seen it doesn't happen. So it will always be the case, but I think we are definitely in a trajectory where this will one day be feasible.
So what is the problem this time specifically? How it could be resolved, do you think? Can you be more specific?
So I think it was a frozen valve. So these things happen. There can be some valve issue, some fuel issue, some small electronics issue. And all these are, think of, if you're going on a long journey with your car, you would want to think everything is perfect shape. And so this is, if if there's something a little bit wrong, then you might lose 100 million, $200 million. So why not just get it correct, get the weather in line? So these are all normal part of the space business.
One would also wonder as to why this minor problem, quote unquote, was not discovered before the attempted launch.
Well, that's a good question. And that is why, if you notice, there were like 17 attempts before which failed. And these were, and I guess the Elon Musk SpaceX philosophy is to try it and then discover and then go back to the drawing table. Quite different from the space launch system which NASA is developing. So there you would try to do all the troubleshooting and then go to the pad and have more or less 90% chance of success. So here it's a different philosophy. Both philosophies work.
It's a very interesting philosophy because most of the time, for example, NASA or that being practiced by official organizations like in Europe or in China, for example, are more careful in terms of making it publicized about what is going to be the mission. The troubleshooting mainly will be done before the announcement is being made. But this is totally a different philosophy, as you said.
It's a totally different philosophy.
Yeah. Okay. Let me go to Professor Yang Yuguang also on that. I know, Professor, you are also very keen in working with your colleagues around the world on the Mars exploration.
Yes.
But tell me more about your thoughts on this early attempt this time by SpaceX, and how do you see the overall efforts by human beings to explore Mars? SpaceX, to what extent can contribute to that?
Well, we sing high praise of the efforts made by SpaceX on the innovation on technology and also their achievements on reusable rocket technology. So they already have very good technologies and can greatly reduce the cost for the space travel. But they do have many problems for this Starship. You know that the Starship is a completely reusable. The former Falcon 9 is a partially reusable rocket. This time it's a 100% reusable. But you know that it is a two-stage rocket, and also the Starship itself is the second stage of the rocket. So from the aspect of efficiency, a two-stage rocket is not very effective in deep space missions. So this is a problem. That is the reason why to go to Mars, the SpaceX needs to refueling the Starship many times, usually maybe 5 to 6 times to go to Mars. And also for the moon mission, because it needs a higher delta V, so it even needs 10 times for refueling. So this refueling potential also costs money, also higher the risky. So this is the problem. And moreover, you see that I think the human being, I strongly recommend that the human being should set up a permanent base on the lunar surface to have a continuous residence of human being on the lunar surface for the goal of scientific research, but not colonizing Mars. So that is the problem. Even for go to the Mars and set up a scientific research base, the money invested in this area will be much greater than those invited on the International Space Station. So I don't think before 2030 the human being can land on Mars. So this is a problem. And also, you know that the SpaceX only provided a solution on transportation. And if we want to go to Mars, I mean a manned mission, we need other aspects. And also, there are more challenges in this field.
Very interesting, Mr. Yang. But let me just go a little bit further about that. You talk about there needs to be a lunar base in a way for further exploration of the Mars. Is that what you're trying to say?
Exactly. So the basic logic in this is that, you know, that today it is a different circumstance comparing with the period in the space race. You know that we found water mainly in the North Pole and the South Pole area in the permanent shadow area on the moon. So in the future, if we can utilize the water, we can use the water to get hydrogen and oxygen, and so you can use the water to get the propellant. And you know that the gravity of the moon is much smaller than the Earth. So to some extent, in the future, sooner or later, we can get more cheap propellant from the moon than from bring that from the Earth. So if that technology, I mean the on-site resource utilization technology become more practical, it is possible that we can be cheaper to start from the moon than from the Earth. So this is a basic assumption. But you know that for this assumption, it might maybe happen maybe 20 years or 30 years later, not now. So it is the first step to set up a base on the lunar surface. Either, that the ESA, the European Space Agency, raised the idea of the Moon Village, and I am also a founding member of the Moon Village Association.
Okay, there
and
we
in
go.
The future, yes, but that we China also have an international lunar research station on the moon surface. But mainly, that on the first step, it is a robotic one, not a permanent, not a manned one.
I'm a little bit confused, Professor Yang.
Yes.
So you are suggesting we need to do something on the moon in terms of experiments and using it as a launching pad, quote unquote, for further human exploration into the outer space.
Yes.
That's what you're trying to suggest. And yet we see the others also, including China, trying to directly do something with Mars in terms of exploration. So how do you see the two ways that you just suggested? I'm going to bring Dr. Ghosh also into the conversation a bit later. Professor Yang, can you clarify?
I don't think there are any essential conflict between this. You know that today all the missions on the Mars, including the work of Dr. Ghosh, are robotic ones. So for any celestial bodies in the solar system, we first conduct the unmanned or robotic missions to these celestial bodies for scientific research. But sooner or later, we should have human beings walk there and do more complicated tasks there, and even set up base. I mean that that for the moon, you mentioned that we are now just in the phase from the exploration phase to the exploitation phase.
Right.
So that is the reason why we conducted so many reasons, including China and other countries on the moon. But the final goal is to reduce the cost for transportation. You know that either for the moon or for the Mars, reducing the cost, even especially for the transportation, will be the most critical, most
Absolutely.
important and essential issue for all of us.
Right. Dr. Ghosh, your response.
Okay, so it's a very complex play of many factors. Why I am excited is that the basic mode of transportation, be it to Moon, Mars, Jupiter, etc., that cost will come down 100 times. So what can you do with it? Well, one of the options is you can go and set up a lunar base and go to Mars. Okay, set up a lunar base or go to Mars is a very complex question. Why? Even if the cost is very low, the infrastructure there has to develop to support humans there. Not very trivial. So, okay. Then the other thing is where I agree with Mr. Yang is Moon is 3 days away, Mars is 6 months away. So better to make the mistakes in the Moon and learn from it and then head to Mars. Fourth is there has to be a commercial reason to go to Moon or Mars. Otherwise, a government-funded space program will not be able to deliver trillions of dollars.
Let's talk about the cost, which I think is a crucial factor, as both of you agreed on. Now we see international cooperation in Mars exploration, but at the same time, we know the world is changing, so there might be more fragmentation rather than more intense cooperation, even though we want cooperation from the scientist perspective. So how do you see, this kind of what Elon Musk is trying to do, commercialization of advocacy about trying to do something about Mars? Is it mainly too much business focused? Is it trying to build an illusion for the human being at this moment? Or is it really going to help support part of the exploration that national governments and international cooperations among national governments through international organizations are trying to do? Dr. Ghosh.
So it's a mixture of the two things you mentioned. One is there is an illusion. If you look at Elon Musk's presentation where he talks about this, maybe 5 years back, he's trying to make Mars like Earth. It's nice to conceive that there is much more to increase the atmospheric pressure on Mars. How can you change a whole planet? Like all these things, like, making plants grow on Mars, it looks very good on paper. But to actually make it happen is different. Okay, where the cost comes in. So imagine there is a university in China or America which wants to send a mission to the moon. It used to cost $500 million. Suddenly, it costs $5 million. Changes everything. So that is why for exploration, it is very good. So for example, we had to, if you think of the space telescopes, they have to be folded very tough in a fairing because mass is a constraint. That's why it becomes complex, takes longer to develop, more expensive to develop. If this became easier and you could send a lot of stuff for very little money to space, it is good for exploration, good for science, and good for whatever. See, Jeff Bezos wants to do a base on the moon. He has to transport huge materials to, like, I don't know, work the soil, take cars to the moon. All this will become possible only if the cost goes down 100 times or maybe 1,000 times. So that is the excitement. But the other part which you said, it's kind of dreamy. That is also true. That, you know, you cannot just convert Mars and plant forests, and that is a much longer dream.
Let's take a look at what governments are doing, or international organizations that are bringing governments together, doing on Mars or toward Mars. Dr. Ghosh, what do you consider as some of the most significant steps over the past 3 years? Because it's been a common memory of 3 years of pandemic for everyone in this world. So there is a vacuum of memory about what exactly has been doing in terms of Mars exploration. Tell me more about your thoughts, important steps.
Well, Mars exploration was zero in 96. And in this maybe less than 30 years, we have come from knowing nothing to we have better data on the altitude of Mars, on the elevation, etc., on mineralogy. So you had major missions from the US, rover missions, major missions from China. So it has the volume of data that we have now, and is incredible. And we're ready for the next step, which is actually getting samples back from Mars to Earth and studying them in laboratories, which both the US and China plan to do in the next 5-10 years. So it has, part of the excitement that you see Mars missions is because, see, all these are human missions, robotic missions, very simple. If the robotic dies, nothing happens, you know, you lose $1 billion. It's a lot of money. But imagine there's 4 astronauts headed to Mars and something happens. You cannot absorb that. It's a huge deal, right? So, so yes, it's a mix of many different factors.
Yes, indeed. I could tell Dr. Ghosh has been putting his life on Mars exploration and research. Certainly, there's a lot of passion behind what you just said. Go to you, Professor Yang, also on the same question. What do you consider as some of the most important steps, some of the most significant steps human beings has done over the past few years in terms of Mars exploration?
Well, you know, that's, I should emphasize again, in this century, just in this century, the human being has no chance to colonizing Mars. So in the single
quote-unquote colonizing Mars.
Even a single trip to Mars, so any country cannot afford the cost for go to Mars, a manned mission to the Mars. So I think that the international cooperation will be very, very necessary for achieve these kind of missions in the future. I can read you an example. You know that just during our Tianwen-1 Mars mission, the first mission of China, we just conducted a test with ESA, with European Space Agency. We used the ground stations of ESA to receive the scientific research data from our Tianwen-1 orbiter, and those data get from and also use the orbiter of the European Space Agency to receive the data from our rover on the Martian surface. So this is, although it is not a concrete cooperation, but this is a very good attempt, a good start for the future cooperation between China and the European Space Agency.
Right. What about for the US side, Dr. Ghosh? Tell me more about specifically what you have done as critical steps in future exploration on Mars over the past few years you consider significant?
Absolutely. So think of, in 90s, you thought Mars was an inhospitable terrain. Now you know there is water in the past. There were oceans on Mars. There was huge flooding on Mars. The first 300 million years of Mars on Mars was like Earth. There were probably lots of water, and maybe life on Mars. Two is, you know that there is water under under the surface on Mars. Three is, in 2001, we discovered ice on the Martian poles. So water ice on the Martian poles. Four is, we have data on the Martian atmosphere, on how much carbon dioxide is there, how much, what is the storm pattern. So all this used to be unknown. And then if you wanted to land on Mars, we have a very detailed map of Mars, including topography. So, and with the sample return from Mars towards the end of this decade, we will know much more. So it has been a big journey.
As technologies develop, as we are discovering more about the outer space, how do you see Mars, its significance vis-a-vis other possible discoveries in the near future with the latest technologies? Dr. Ghosh.
Indeed, we are. And it's very good that you mentioned this. 3 days ago, the JUICE mission to Jupiter's moons were launched. Okay, so the exciting thing about Jupiter's moons is, so you have what's on Earth. There is the core, the crust, mantle, and core. In Jupiter, some of these moons, Ganymede, etc., have maybe 10 miles of crust, and then there is an ocean which is bigger than all oceans of the world combined, maybe 100-mile deep ocean. So this ocean is dark because it's under the surface, right? But oceans on Earth are also dark because after 1 mile, there is no, it's called the aphotic zone. There's no light. So if life can be on Earth's oceans, why can't there be life in Ganymede under the oceans? So this is what the JUICE mission will tackle. It's the ESA mission. It will reach in 2031. Then NASA has another mission which will reach in 2030. So this is the new frontier. The likelihood of finding present life, not past life, life in the present, in this ocean is there, not on Mars. So you can say the satellites of Jupiter and Saturn, some of these which have oceans underneath, have a much greater likelihood of life.
Thank you. Professor Yang, I want to turn the question from the other way around. It's wonderful to see concerted efforts to explore one subject, as you suggested. But it's also wonderful to see diversity of, shall I say, research goals, so that we were going to see more possibilities in terms of research targets. Earlier, Dr. Ghosh mentioned about not only Mars, but also Jupiter and some of the others. But for China, and also China's thoughts on cooperation with others, what might be some of the other options that can go parallel or can be used as a future possibility?
Well, you know that Jupiter is a very complex and very big system. So Dr. Ghosh has already mentioned the JUICE mission from the European Space Agency to explore the third Galileo moon of the Jupiter, which means the Ganymede. But you know that NASA also has a mission called the Europa Clipper to explore the Europa. But in the future, maybe China has the option to explore the fourth Galileo moon, the Callisto. So these are very important steps for the human being to have a better understanding of the Jupiter system. Also, in the future, you know that China also has the option to explore to go even deeper into space. I mean the icy giants, the Neptune or Uranus. So these kind of in the years before, only the Voyager 2 from the United States has explored these very giant planets. So in the future, it is also an option for China. Moreover, you see that besides these objects in the outer system and also the Mars, there are also other objects we should focusing on. For instance, the near-Earth objects. European Space Agency and also JAXA has already have some missions to these kind of celestial bodies. But in China, we will also have the Tianwen-2 mission in the near future to have a sample return from the near-Earth asteroid and then go to the main belt between the Mars and Jupiter. So all these steps are to have a better understanding of the solar system and also give a comprehensive knowledge about the solar system.
We started by talking about SpaceX. I want to wrap up before we go also by talking about the private attempts and the private experiments. For example, in the US, there's also Jeff Bezos Blue Origin. Meanwhile, in Europe, there's Arianespace that both are trying to work on the outer space. How much do you see one after another commercial attempts to contribute to the overall humans' exploration of the outer space? And what is its ultimate relations with some of the most well-established research, for example, of NASA, of China's, of Europe's, research at this stage?
In the space community, we've already recognized the great achievements by the Blue Origin. You know that the suborbital travel, the space tourism, is very, very important for the human space flight activity field in the future. You know that for common people, with the innovation and also the commercialization of this field, in the future, the cost for a single trip to the suborbital travel may reduce from today about $200,000 to $300,000, maybe 10 times cheaper than that. At that moment, the common people can have the chance to visit the outer space based on this suborbital travel. You see that this industry will form a very huge, very giant field in the future. And also, although it is suborbital travel, is not as good as of the orbital travel, but in the future, also, it is very hope to have direct returns from this area, very special in this manned space field. Moreover, you see that not only the private companies in the future, both those from the state-owned companies or the private company will also focusing on the nuclear-based propulsion technology. So this is a very hope technology. Either the nuclear thermal or nuclear electric propulsion system will be very effective on reducing the cost, greatly reduce cost for the deep space travels.
I see, very exciting. Go to you, Dr. Ghosh.
Right. So what I think is Jeff Bezos and Arianespace or whatever you mentioned, they are far behind. Suborbital is not interesting. So they are trying to make orbital vehicles if they get there. But right now, I would say Jeff Bezos' company is far behind in terms of to SpaceX. Second point, what is the relation with NASA and the Chinese Space Institute, right? So these are the organizations which fund these missions. Okay, so they make this happen, and they are the eventual customers. And when they are able to make the technology happen, NASA buys the services. So NASA is paying SpaceX for landing on the moon 2 years later. Okay, so NASA, it's NASA probably, and China Space Organization probably, they invest in many things, and this is one of them. So it does not conflict with their goal. They actually help with their goal, and that's why they fund them.
Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, Professor Yang Yuguang, what a pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for today. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. Thanks for watching, and see you back here tomorrow.